The city hummed with its usual rhythm, a backdrop of muted chaos against which Liam and Sarah lived their quiet lives. Their apartment, a modest but cozy place, was perched across from a crumbling, abandoned building, a relic of a forgotten era. Its broken windows and ivy-covered facade blended into the scenery, an unremarkable piece of urban decay. At first, it was nothing, a faint shape in a window, barely noticeable. Sarah spotted it while sipping tea one evening and dismissed it as a trick of the light. Days passed, but the silhouette remained, always in the same spot, always still. She told herself it was nothing to worry about, just a fragment of the dilapidated building's eerie charm. Liam didn't see it for days, even as Sarah's unease grew. Her curtains were drawn tighter, her movements in the apartment more cautious. The sense of being watched pressed against her mind like an invisible weight. Eventually, Liam began to feel it too. The figure in the window became a presence they couldn't ignore, even though it never moved. Then the notes appeared. The first was on a folded piece of yellowed paper, slipped under their door. It described the quiet details of Sarah's morning, the mug she chose for her tea, the music she played, the way her fingers tapped the keyboard as she worked. The handwriting was precise and old-fashioned, each letter etched with unsettling care. The second note arrived 2 days later, recounting an evening of laughter and comfort. The words captured their shared dinner, the subtle way Liam tilted his head when thinking, Sarah's habit of brushing hair behind her ear when she listened. The knowledge felt invasive, a stranger's gaze piercing their walls. More notes followed. Each was more intimate than the last. The watcher knew everything. When they argued, when they reconciled, the food they ate, the dreams they whispered in the dark. The apartment began to feel less like home and more like a stage under relentless scrutiny. One gray morning, after yet another sleepless night, Liam left the apartment. He crossed the street to the abandoned building, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The air inside was stale and heavy, carrying the scent of mold and decay. His footsteps echoed against the cracked tiles as he climbed the sagging staircase. The watcher's window was on the top floor. Each step brought him closer to the truth, the anticipation gnawing at him. Reaching the landing, he approached the room with the window. The door was ajar, creaking slightly as he pushed it open. The room was empty. Dust-coated floors bore no footprints. Cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. The only object in the space was a mirror propped against the wall, its surface tarnished with age. In the faint reflection, Liam saw himself and the window behind him, but no figure. The silhouette had vanished. He returned home, shaken but resolved to move on. The watcher was gone, he told himself. Yet the notes didn't stop. They became darker, more insidious, hinting at actions they hadn't yet taken, emotions they hadn't yet expressed. It was as if the watcher wasn't just observing but steering their lives, subtly influencing the choices they made. Sarah stopped leaving the apartment altogether. The sense of being watched consumed her. Liam's nights were filled with fitful dreams, the watcher's presence bleeding into his subconscious. Their once loving relationship turned brittle under the strain, each blaming the other for their growing paranoia. Then, one day, everything stopped. The notes ceased, the figure in the window didn't reappear, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Weeks passed, and life slowly regained its rhythm. The couple, though shaken, began to believe it was over. Months later, a demolition crew arrived to tear down the abandoned building. As the walls crumbled, something hidden was revealed. A small soundproofed room concealed within the structure. Inside were cameras, photographs, and journals documenting Liam and Sarah's lives in harrowing detail. But the discovery didn't make the news. That night, a new note slid under their door. "I'll always be watching." And this time, it wasn't from the abandoned building. Emily had always considered her apartment a sanctuary, a quiet space she had carefully curated over the years. Financial pressures, however, pushed her to rent out the spare room. When Mark showed up, a quiet, slightly disheveled man with a deep fascination for old books and folklore, he seemed like the perfect tenant. He paid his rent on time, kept mostly to himself, and rarely ventured outside his room. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Mark's presence was almost imperceptible, save for the occasional clink of a kettle in the kitchen or the faint shuffle of footsteps late at night. But then, subtle disturbances began to creep into the apartment. At first, they were minor. A cold draft brushing against Emily's neck in her otherwise warm living room, or faint creaks from the floorboards when no one was walking. Soon, the disturbances escalated. Emily woke one night to an odd, rhythmic murmuring. At first, she thought it was the hum of a neighbor's TV, but it grew louder, more deliberate. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, vibrating with a weight that pressed against her chest. Unable to sleep, she tiptoed through the hallway, the source unmistakably emanating from Mark's room. The noise stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving only an unsettling silence in its wake. During the day, Mark's odd habits became more apparent. He spent long hours hunched over books with cracked spines and faded titles, their pages yellowed with age. Symbols and diagrams filled his notebooks, along with scrawled notes in a language Emily didn't recognize. His collection of objects, candles, bundles of dried herbs, and small stone figurines grew, cluttering the small desk he had brought with him. The apartment itself seemed to respond to his presence. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of rooms, flickering as if caught in a faint, invisible breeze. The temperature would plummet inexplicably, leaving Emily shivering under heavy blankets. Once, while cleaning, she found a strange symbol etched lightly into the wood beneath the carpet near the spare room's door. As the disturbances intensified, Emily began to notice subtle changes in the air around her home. It felt heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. One night, the walls seemed to hum softly, a vibration that she felt more than heard. Objects shifted slightly out of place, and doors she knew she had closed were left ajar. The worst of it was the sense of being watched, an oppressive awareness that prickled at her skin, no matter where she stood. Emily's curiosity turned to unease when she discovered an old journal tucked away in Mark's room. The pages detailed accounts of thin places where the barriers between worlds grew weak. The notes spoke of rituals to close these gateways, warning of the dangers that came with attempting to interact with them. While she wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of an eccentric, the experiences in her apartment were too vivid to ignore. One night, a loud crash jolted her awake. The sound reverberated through the apartment, shaking the walls and scattering framed pictures to the floor. Racing into the living room, she found Mark standing in the center of a chalk-drawn circle. Symbols surrounded him, glowing faintly in the dim light of flickering candles. The air felt charged, a low hum vibrating through the floor beneath her feet. A strange light pulsed in the center of the circle, faint figures writhing within it like shadows cast by an unseen fire. Emily watched in horror as Mark methodically worked through a ritual, his movements deliberate and controlled. The light in the circle grew brighter, illuminating the room with an eerie glow. The figures within the light pressed against its edges, their distorted forms growing clearer. It was as though they were trying to break through. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, as the glow reached a blinding peak. Then, with a sudden burst, the light collapsed inward, extinguishing itself in an instant. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the soft sputtering of dying candles. Emily stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. In the following days, the apartment seemed calmer, as if a weight had been lifted. The cold drafts and unsettling noises disappeared, replaced by a stillness that felt almost too quiet. Mark remained for a short time afterward, his behavior subdued, his belongings packed neatly into a single bag. One day, he simply left without a word, leaving behind only faint traces of chalk on the floor and the lingering memory of what had occurred. Though the disturbances ceased, Emily never felt entirely at ease in her apartment again. The air always seemed a little heavier, the shadows a little darker. She avoided the spare room altogether, unable to shake the feeling that something still lingered, just out of sight, waiting for another chance to break through. Thank you for joining us for these chilling tales. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. Drop a comment to share your thoughts, and stay tuned for more haunting adventures.